boy, the Force. And they are actually choosing to do that? Rex asked, shaking his head as he watched the insanity continue from his considerable distance. Ahsoka nodded, not bothering to look again for herself. She had already tried and failed to communicate with the rebels, to make them understand the need for them to wait for Republic support and to retreat from their current attack. Apparently, she confirmed bitterly, staring off in the opposite direction. The basilica and its walls stood in sight from here, and though their vantage point was fairly distant, they could still clearly see that the battle was in full swing. One of the makeshift but enormous armies of Axumite freedom fighters had thrown itself blindly into the Imperial defenses, seemingly maddened into the suicidal attack by sheer need for revenge. Their bodies had begun to form piles so large, Rex could discern them even from his position. What could drive people to this kind of insanity? He whispered to himself. Ahsoka wanted to tell him it was hatred, that the Imperials had stoked these fires themselves. In many ways, they had. She could not deny that. But she could feel that something was wrong with those people. When she had spoken over comms with the one calling himself their leader, he had been utterly uncompromising about the assault, and when she had managed to speak with a few of the civilian soldiers going out to that battle, the look in their eyes had borne no fear or reason at all. Quite to the contrary, they had seemed eager, frenzied. Angry, yes, but much more than that as well. As if doing this fulfilled something in them that Ahsoka just could not see or understand, like addicts getting their fix. The memory sent shivers up and down her spine, and when she spotted something of interest up ahead, she gratefully embraced the distraction. "Hey Rex, look at this," she said, calling his attention to her and away from the bloodbath. He turned and followed the angle of her pointing hand until they both spotted it, a sparking, hovering form no larger than a head. At first, Rex thought it must have been one of the droids brought by the freedom fighter forces, but soon he realized it was not that at all. It was one of the mechanized hovering skulls that accompanied the Imperial soldiery. "I see it," he said, raising one of his pistols and sighting the thing down. He was stopped, however, when Ahsoka reached up and grabbed the barrel of his weapon, pulling it down as she continued to watch it hover and buzz around, seeming as though it were looking for something. "Hold on, Rex. I want to capture it," she said, letting his gun go and beginning to stalk forward. "But General Windu," he began to say. "This isn't a soldier, it's a piece of technology," Ahsoka interjected. "He'd want us to capture it," she asserted. Rex rolled his eyes behind his helmet and sighed, but pulled his gun up, aiming his pistol skyward as he followed after her, signaling to their scattered group to reconvene quietly. Meanwhile, Ahsoka swiftly made her way towards the skull, Rex catching up to her when she had come very close. He was not as sneaky, however, stepping on a piece of resonant metal, drawing attention to himself and causing the floating skull to spin around and face him. "Whoa, whoa, easy there, you little horrifying skull thing," Rex said, waving his free hand in a calming gesture. A blue scanning light flashed out from the mechanized eye on the skull, making the clone flinch back, though Rex kept his gun aimed up. The skull beeped, and a red light flashed atop its head.
"Heretical language detected. Republic replica genes detected. Alert. Alert."
It bleated before turning and zipping off in a rush. "Aw, Rex, you scared it away," Ahsoka said as they watched it hover and bounce about aimlessly in the air, flashing its red light and repeating its former sentence 5 or 6 times. And then, the flashing stopped, the thing ceased talking, and resumed its previous snooping and scanning. Rex shrugged. "Looks fine now," he said dismissively. Ahsoka nodded, rubbing her chin. "Yeah. Hey, stay here. I'm going to try to come up to it alone," she said before dashing off after it again. "Just don't name it," Rex called after her, staying behind this time. Ahsoka only snuck up to it in order to close the distance, but stood up straight once she had come near, kicking some scrap across the ground to draw its attention. Just like before, the skull spun in the air, hovering over to her and beginning to scan. She coughed a little to clear her throat as it did this, and then spoke. "Greetings, machine spirit," she said in her thickly accented Gothic. Ahsoka almost cringed as she tried, having always relied on translators more than anything else for foreign languages, having lacked Anakin's impressive knack for learning new words and grammar, though she had still been trained in it.
Low Gothic, dialect, Centauri Prime, detected.
The machine droned.
Unknown abhuman genes detected. State affiliation.
It said after a moment of visible processing. Ahsoka bit her lip, pondering how to answer.
State affiliation.
It repeated. Ahsoka Tano, Knight of the Motive Force, she said, trying to lie as little as possible to the odd machine, and more than a little curious as to how it would receive her answer.
Record missing. Data error.
It said after another long pause of visible cogitation.
Lockout advised. Priority override. Override complete.
It seemed to say to itself before addressing her directly again.
Clarify loyalty. Do you serve the God Emperor of mankind?
It asked. No, Ahsoka said quickly. I serve the Motive Force, she corrected. The hovering skull seemed to freeze then, remaining airborne but now neither making noise nor running away. Ahsoka waited nervously and almost jumped when the communicator in her ear went off. Ahsoka, I don't want to break up your little experiment with the Imperial Clanker, but there is a mob heading your way, coming up from the far approach. Looks like they're heading towards the Basilica, but I doubt they'll ignore the skull if they see it. Rex said to her over the earbud. Thanks for the heads up, Rex, she said back to him before looking around frantically. The young knight spotted what she needed lying on the floor near them, a discarded Imperial banner bearing the flag of one of their regiments. She ran over to it, stepping on the flagpole to keep it grounded as she picked up the flag and tugged it hard, tearing it off its frame. Seeing this did seem to make the skull become more active, but she did not pause as she quickly walked back over to it and tossed the banner over it.
What is the meaning of this action?
It questioned as she wrapped it up, forming an impromptu sack around it with the flag. The skull then buzzed and released muffled speech, flashing its red light 3 times as it did, hovering back and forth as Ahsoka tried to haul it down. Shh, you have to be quiet now, the former Jedi hissed at the struggling machine servant. It began to wave up and down, back and forth as it tried to get free. Stop moving around! I'm hiding you! Ahsoka snapped, clonking the skull none too gently with her fist and causing it to drop limply, held up only by the makeshift sack. It was barely a minute after this that the mob Rex had described arrived, and to Ahsoka's shock, it was far, far more than a mob. Men and women approached, their numbers composing various races and aliens along with the majority of humans who made up Axum's population. They were an odd variety, marching in loose cliques, clans, and groupings in place of ranks and lines, and each one differed from the others around them. Their only uniformity, sometimes even within their own groups, was their desire to see the Imperium fall. Some wore ancient armors of ornate design, others street clothes, and others still wore scavenged pieces. A Phase 2 vambrace here, an Imperial vest or looted helmet there. They hefted flags bearing the Republic wheel and the Axumite standard, many singing discordant and impromptu battle songs, jeering and pumping their fists as they marched in staggered unison. They had vehicles as well, mostly civilian craft or policing vessels and speeders, most modified in some way to either carry more armor or mount some kind of weapon. And the young knight could see that these men and women were not the same as the frenzied, rioting rebels they were following after. Their minds were still very much their own, their mentality that of men following a leader, not merely losing themselves to a feeling. Unconsciously, her eyes were drawn in towards that leader, and the small group of 3 who stood around him, the invisible center of their rebel army. The man wore a long, black trench coat, and he was both tall and thick, like a human Gundark. One of his large hands was tucked into a pocket on the coat, while his other flicked and lit a lighter between his fingers, toying with it until he tried to light it and failed, the object evidently out of juice. He sighed in the approaching distance, tossing the thing away like trash before tucking that hand into a pocket as well. To his left was a slim, small woman who seemed to be wearing a very similar trench coat. But where the man beside her had on green work fatigues beneath his, she was wrapped in a form-fitting black catsuit of some shadowy material Ahsoka did not recognize. Her hair was long and pale gold in color, and her eyes seemed sunken, though also unnaturally luminous, like blue glowworms biting their own tails. She had her hands tucked behind her head, eyes staring up and around at the high spires which surrounded them all, taking long, exaggerated strides as she rolled something round around in her mouth, the impression obvious against her cheek. To the man's right was another man, this one shorter but slender and bookish, wearing an eye patch over one eye and a thick single spectacle over the other. His head was turned down, his one eye locked firmly onto a glowing blue datapad he held in his hand, the other scrolling through it. The other man had light brown hair, and his remaining eye was dark green and intensely focused. He would reach up every couple of moments to stroke his small, well-oiled beard before returning his fingers to the pad. Just behind them, walking in the first, larger man's shadow, was a more recognizable figure. Ahsoka knew what bounty hunters looked like, what they walked like. Avarice in the eyes, hunched shoulders, and each and every step he took forward was composed of a supreme arrogance and lethal intention. It didn't matter where in the wide galaxy they came from, whether Mandalorian, Trandoshan, or even Hetman. They all bore the signs, as did this final member of their small party. He was a short man, human as well, but stout and thickly built, yet also light on his feet. His eyes were a ruddy pink color, surrounded by bloodshot veins, and he was completely clean-shaven. He even lacked eyebrows, not a single hair marring the stoic, upturned expression he faced everyone around him with. But what stood out from his appearance far, far more was the fact that the man was covered from head to toe in weaponry. Knives, swords, guns, blasters, some Imperial, some Republic, but most entirely outside of Ahsoka's wide experience. He rustled and clicked with every step forward he made, leering down his nose at those around him, a black skull tattooed over his right eye. The path of all four of these odd, central figures strayed right beside where Ahsoka now stood, and she briefly considered backing away, but decided against it, standing as she had when the other rebels had passed her, and watching on silently. The former Jedi almost cursed the decision out loud as two black glints, the raven-colored eyes of the central man, met her own, and he subtly altered his trajectory, no longer merely coming near her, but headed directly towards the Togrutan warrior. "Hey there," he said as he came closer, withdrawing one hand from his black coat and waving it as he drew near, stopping about 8 paces from where Ahsoka stood. The young, almost Jedi narrowed her eyes, an odd sense coming over her as she gave a small wave of her own using her recently healed arm, but said nothing, her other hand clutching the end of her sack with a white-knuckled grip. The man waited a moment to see if she would speak, before pressing on with a sigh. "Sorry to ask, but couldn't help but notice that weapon you've got there," the man said, gesturing towards the lightsaber at her waist, his words thickly accented with a low-worker dialect. "Wouldn't happen to be a Jedi, would ya?" he finished. "And if I am?" Ahsoka asked, not quite defensive, but on her guard as she tried to figure out what was bothering her so much about this man. "Well, if you are, I want to make another appeal for your help," the large, dark-eyed soldier said with a shrug. "Help?" Ahsoka asked, the man nodding in response. "You control the clone armies, don't you? We're about to go into battle, but the Republic is just sitting by the sidelines. Would sure be great to have that support on our side during the attack. Me and the other leaders agreed to march on the cathedral or whatever they call it. We want to end this fight, and I want you to help us," he said, voice rough and somewhat raspy. Ahsoka looked back towards the walls of the basilica and shook her head with a derisive puff. "So you're going to charge all these people against those Imperial fortifications?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. He nodded grimly, black eyes glinting in the light.
Aye, that is what I'm intending. We won't be alone either. Together with the others who are already there, we should be able to create a break in their defenses.
He reasoned.
That should be will become a will be if we have clone and Jedi support. It would all go a lot smoother if we had the Republic at our backs.
He added, eyeing her lightsaber again. Yeah, it would, which is why all of you should have waited, she said with an exasperated sigh, grunting as she heaved her sack over her shoulder, holding it with one hand as she indicated with her other. I don't want all of these people to die, especially not pointlessly. But that is almost certainly what you and people like you are going to lead them into. Pointless death, Ahsoka said, sweeping out her hand.
Then help us. Call your clone battalions and...
Samael began to say. I can't do that. I don't even have the rank to order it, and even if I did, I wouldn't want to waste our manpower on a siege we can execute better with a little patience. Ahsoka interjected pointedly. The man tensed his face in frustration, but then released it with a sigh, one hand reaching into his pocket to withdraw a thin, white tube of wrapped narcotic. He placed it between his lips, a lighter appearing in his other hand, this one fresh and unused, as he revealed when he flicked it open and lit the end of his cigarette. He sucked on it, dragging a long hit from the stuff before expelling it as he spoke, shaking his head all the while.
See, that is the difference between us, Jedi. You would let this become a siege. I'm trying to avoid that,
he said. Try as much as you like. A siege is exactly what is waiting for you, whether you want to avoid it or not. Ahsoka shot back. He sighed with helpless frustration and shrugged, seemingly about to turn away when his eyes caught on something. He reached up and pulled the burning tube from his mouth and gestured with it towards the impromptu sack.
What do you got in there?
He asked. Ahsoka shrugged away instinctively from his question, scowling lightly. Nothing, she said quickly.
You don't keep nothing in a sack,
he mentioned, and as he spoke, Ahsoka noticed the short weapon-coated man and the small blonde woman begin to casually walk out to either side. Why do you care? Ahsoka asked contentiously, shrugging the sack away from them, if subtly. The man bobbed his large shoulders, but his eyes were intense and locked onto hers, trying to read her.
I might not. I don't know yet. I'm more interested in why you would hide it than why you have it,
he said calmly, hands reaching into his pockets again. Ahsoka could feel the tension rising, could feel aggression beginning to spike silently around her, other rebels stopping to take note of the exchange. Normally, she would have expected many would come to her defense, but not in this crowd, not when they were all under the impression that the Republic was content to watch them die. She sighed, shoulders relaxing a bit as she took on an intentionally defeated posture. It's a head, she confessed. The man's eyebrows rose.
Head? Whose head?
He asked. She shrugged at the question. An Imperial I found on the battlefield. I don't know the name, the former Jedi admitted.
And can I ask why you're carrying around an Imperial head in a sack?
He asked. She grinned then, allowing her canines to slide down a little, giving her smile a predatory edge. Her ability to extend her two front canines was one she rarely used, but was thankful for, especially now as she blatantly lied through those sharp teeth. It's a trophy, she told him. He nodded slowly, eyeing her, and then the sack, and then her again, before shrugging one last time.
To each their own way, as I always say,
he said as he began to turn away from her, a subtle shuddering sigh escaping Ahsoka silently as he did.
By the way, what is your name?
He asked before he left. My name is Ahsoka Tano, and yours? Was her response.
I am called Samael. I hope to see you out there at some point, Ahsoka Tano.
The man finished, his tone not entirely unkind as he walked away, trailing smoke in his wake as his followers turned to keep pace. It was not long after that the army passed her by, her clones approaching her as the last of the Axumite rebels hurried after their leader. She shook her head as if trying to clear her head tails of cobwebs. What did he want? Rex asked as he and the other troopers approached. Ahsoka scowled in frustration. He wanted us to join his crazy assault on the Imperial walls. He wanted me to go make it happen somehow, she explained to her friend. Rex leaned back in a way which spoke without words, and Ahsoka turned to fully face him, raising an eyebrow at the clone. What? She asked him. Well, it looks like he might get what he wanted. New orders have come in from General Windu, said Rex, reaching down to withdraw something from his belt before holding out his holocommunicator to her. Huh? What do you mean by that? Ahsoka asked, half in shock. Rex grimaced under his helmet. He hated being the bearer of bad news. I mean, it seems like General Windu has changed his mind.